Hello and welcome to Assemblies of the World with me, Anna Isabel. My guest today is Gloria Moss, who is, I believe, the creator of the Truth University, home of critical thinking. Hello, Gloria.
Hi, Anna.
So I, I really, when I discovered what you're doing, I couldn't help but get very excited. And so here you are, and I'm very grateful for that. Let's begin with what is the Truth University?
Truth University is one, as you said, that places a premium on critical thinking. With critical thinking, we can pierce through falsehoods in an attempt to find truth, which, according to some people, perhaps more in the past than in the present, is actually the purpose of universities. And maybe I could begin by reading out some rather wonderful words, I think, from a former president, the seventh president of the University of Chicago, George Beadle. And he uttered these words in 1960. And he said that for many people, the quest for the truth is the object of university education and university research. And he wasn't just anybody. He was a Nobel Prize winner in 1958 for research into the role of genes for regulating biochemical events within cells. And he was a man of great wisdom. And I'd just like to read you a few lines from his pen. And this is what he said. And we're going back about 60 years here. Here he is. One cannot search for truth with a closed mind or without the right to question or doubt at every step. Any injunction to close the mind, to restrict one's beliefs arbitrarily, or to accept on authority without doubt violates the concept of freedom of the mind. And I quote George Beadle because that is very much the vision of Truth University. It's a home not only for critical thinking, but for people to exercise what Beadle referred to as freedom of the mind. And well, I regret that this is no longer possible in most legacy universities today.
No, I think, you know, we need to explore what the aims of education are. And you've just made a very clear statement there. And I'm thinking about medieval schools and I'm thinking about schools in the ancient world where there was a great deal of emphasis placed on rhetoric. So the ability to express an argument and back it up. Um, and and I think going back to my experience at university, there was still some of that going on because you had to present your argument, you had to be able to back it up, and that was the work of every essay I ever had to write. So this is it's hugely important, and increasingly what we are seeing is that that has been lost because when we're being asked to make a statement and back it up, we're opening a door for discussion. And, somebody says something in the course of conversation, even in the course of conversation, somebody might say something that makes you raise your eyebrows a little bit. And the most positive response is to say, what makes you think that, or what makes you say that, or that's a little bit unusual. Where are you getting that idea from? And that's normal, and that's what we are used to. obviously some people want to shut the conversation down because they feel threatened. And so now we're in a situation whereby in our so-called education system, we're wanting to shut the conversation down because it's threatening to those who have a vested interest in the minds developing in a certain direction. So it's a real contrast to, and I think back to a certain politician who was elected as prime minister at the end of the 90s, who used the word education, it seemed, every other way, and is known for saying education, education, education. And actually, in hindsight, what I now see is the importance of education was the weaponizing of the education system. And really, instead of education, 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 what he actually was saying is indoctrination, indoctrination, indoctrination. And that's what we're seeing. So this is why I saw, when I learned what you're doing, I became so excited. So we know what the aims are for the Truth University. You state them quite clearly. How are you going about this? How does it work? Is there a building that people come to? Do you come to venues? Tell us about that.
It's virtual, except for the fact that we run 2 conferences a year. And one is called Questioning History. We had a very exciting one this March, questioning all sorts of aspects of history, whether it was the Gnostics, or in my case, I gave a long talk on the Great Fire of London and how that might link to the concept that some people are familiar with of Tartaria. I could say a bit more about that if that's of interest. And oh gosh, so many other topics. And this summer, we've got our summer conference up in the Peak District, which is Questioning Science. That's the 4th one we've run, and we're adding the media this year, Questioning Science and the media. And we have a very exciting lineup of people covering topics such as the glass ceiling in science, what is being kept from us. There's a speaker talking about moving from 3D to 5-dimensional frequencies and what that means for how we think and how we go about our lives. Do we lose a lot of friends if we make that transition? And I'll be talking about churches and cathedrals and synagogues as originally places of healing, not worship. And my goodness, there's an awful lot of work of evidence to back that one up, as you may well be aware, Anna. And then we've got Mark Devlin giving us 2 talks, and we hope to have a speaker delving into chemtrails, perhaps 2 talks from Ian Simpson, based on a lot of the original research that he is doing. So we have that as an opportunity in Britain for people to get together. But aside from that, it's virtual. And if you go on the website, as you may have, you'll see that there are a lot of free resources. We're up to our 3rd newsletter. And what these newsletters tend to focus on, I don't know if you saw this, was the legacy university system and what they're up to. And my goodness, I think if you read what's going on there, you'd be pretty pleased that you're not part of that system. And I could say something about some of those news items if you'd like. And then we publish books. And so the first book, which is really the manifesto, if you like, for Truth University, is this one, written by the secret professor. It's entitled, can you see that? Am I holding it up? Okay. It's called The Dark Side of Academia, How Truth is Suppressed. Pretty shocking title, but it's just as you say, Anna. The system is there. You used the word before me, to indoctrinate into certain ways of thinking. And so that was the first book. The second book, which I think I've got behind me here, is a book about critical thinking, light bulb moments, and the power of critical thinking, which I wrote with Catherine Armitage, who's a very energetic activist. And this book explains the importance of critical thinking, as well as discussing the obstacles that people face in exercising critical thinking. And those obstacles are often societal or very often psychological, group norms, groupthink. So it discusses some of the psychology studies on how this group thing operates. It's quite extraordinary how strong it is. We also look at the obstacles coming from just watching television, for example, which changes the way that people think. And thinking switches from the left brain to the right brain, so that people are experiencing television emotionally rather than intellectually. And then the television also puts people in a hypnotic state. This is very alarming, which means that when they're in that right brain state, they're also in a hypnotic state. So it's quite a dangerous tool, or a brilliant one, depending on which side of the fence you're sitting on. And then there's more to this book, because right in the middle are 24 first-person accounts of how people got into this way of critical thinking. And they cover, gosh, between them, so many topics. They cover the law, policing, finance. I've written about how the process of critical thinking is very often kick-started by finding anomalies between two pieces of information. I can give you examples of that, if you'd like, relating to the Dead Sea Scrolls. You know, very happy to share some of that with you. And then there are people talking about health. There's a lady called Eve Gilmore, who began her career as a nurse in big London teaching hospitals. And then little by little, she became disabused, disillusioned, and moved to become a natural healer. And then what else? Well, of course, we got chapters on history. There's a chapter from John Hamer, who's an astonishing writer. He's the author of books such as The Falsification of History, The Falsification of Science is a separate book. And he talks about how his questioning journey was started up. And he says that it started when friends of his in Paris reported on what had happened that night in the tunnel in Paris, where Princess Diana's car went skewed off the road. And he said that the first reports, as reported to him by his friends in France, said that she'd actually walked from the car into the ambulance. So that got him thinking in the light of what happened subsequently. And then we have a very philosophical contribution on, well, why are we here? And that's somewhat different from the others. That's written by a British man who now lives in America, called Neil Kramer. And it's called A Study in Evil, his chapter. And his belief is that evil is there for us to hone our sense of morality. It's a wonderful chapter that he's written. And then in the final part of the book, it's a bit like a sandwich, bit about critical thinking at the beginning, 24 accounts in the middle. And then towards the end, we actually dip into literature, into some of the world's finest novels, such as 1984 by George Orwell, and Brave New World, and Fahrenheit 451. And we compare the attributes of people who responded to a survey that I created online with Truth University. I asked them, if you're a critical thinker, if you think you're awake, what sparked this off in your life? And so from that, I had a lot of data, and I compared what these people were saying about the triggers to them becoming critical thinkers and questioning people with what we learn about the heroes of the three novels I mentioned. And actually, the attributes map incredibly closely. And so I think people who have learnt to question are every bit as heroic, really, as these iconic heroes of
I,
1984, Brave New World, and Fahrenheit 451.
I think the issue here is very simple. To question the status quo requires tremendous courage.
Mm.
Because if I think about the collection of people that you're having at your conference, really, you could say you're a bunch of heretics. And this brings us to history, because we know historically that this tension crops up very frequently,
Mm.
different times, between those who would seek to control and those who actually defend the right to think freely and to question. And the truth of the matter is, there is no growth in society unless you have the mavericks who look at things and go, really? But if you turn it upside down, it looks like this.
Well, absolutely. We need innovation. And as Einstein said, question everything. Everything comes out of questioning. And I've done quite a lot of research, well, on many topics. I've written 8 books and over 70 peer-reviewed journal papers and conference papers, journal articles and conference papers. But I've also done quite a lot of delving into the whole business of peer review, which is the system that underpins the vast edifice of academia. And it doesn't make for pretty reading at all, what you discover. I mean, you find that in 1951, it was none other than the tycoon Robert Maxwell who actually set up the whole system of peer review. And my goodness, how did he manage to buy Butterworth Press, or 3/4 of Butterworth Press, just a few years out of the army? I mean, in modern day terms, he paid £500,000 to purchase 3/4 of Butterworth Press. Where did he get the money from? And then within a short 7 years, he'd taken a lease out on a very capacious mansion in Oxford with 53 rooms. And that was costing him, in modern day terms, £96,000. Where did he get the money? Well, I was asking myself, racking my brains, looking online, and well, I don't know if this is the answer, but I came across a BBC documentary, very short one, which said that shortly after he left the army, he actually went to intelligence services and asked if they had money for a publishing venture.
Yes.
So we don't know if they gave them the money, but I'll just leave it there and we can ask the question. And some people would say it works as a very effective or not effective control system. And
Well,
you don't have to take my word for that. I mean, there was an article in 2014, and there have been others of the same kind, that has said that actually peer review is not good at picking up on innovative work.
no, it is, because what it amounts to is peer pressure. And I think this is the thing, that it boils down to this problem, that as human beings, we're social, and nobody likes to be banished from the village. And I think anyone who is wanting to control society knows that, and knows how to use the levers to discourage, let's use the word heresy again, to discourage heresy. So I think it's very clear. It's not lack of intelligence. And I think that if we throw in the desire to trust, because we do want to be able to trust, and if we have in our history a history of high trust in our institutions, then we can become sleepy And in fact, what you talked about with TV and cinema is actually worse than television, because in cinema everything is set up for the hypnotic state. It is dark,
Mm,
and the screen.
mm,
It's you're not going to have as many distractions. The sound is surrounding you. The whole point of cinema is for you to be immersed
mm,
in story.
mm,
So it's, and also the frames per minute, is the number of frames per minute is even more of a hypnotic trigger, because of the way that our eyes are affected through the rate of the frames per minute, which at the moment I can't remember off the top of my head,
mm.
but it is
Fascinating.
absolutely much more hypnotic than television. Because most people, when they are watching television, they have other distractions around them.
Yeah.
They have other distractions around them. And, there might be the dog wanting to go out or the cat wanting to go out of the room. They
Mm,
might have a cup of tea and biscuits. Somebody might say something. There's actual more conversation going on, which is totally discouraged in a cinema where everybody wants to hear nobody
mm,
wants to hear you chatting to your friend, because that's
mm.
and I think, and it's not like I haven't been a fan of cinema. I love a good story. But all I'm pointing out is that you are quite right when you say that there is a hypnotic effect. The strength of television, of course, is repetition, because you have the story that can evolve slowly, and particularly through soap operas and storylines. You have commissioning editors who are going to be very clear about the kinds of stories they want to see aired. And then you have a national broadcaster whose aim is to educate and entertain, and the two are there together for a reason. So I think we all of this spells something. It doesn't have to spell that, but you can see that the potential is there. And all you need is a mind that is bent on controlling society. And when I say a mind, I mean a collective mind, a collective group set on controlling society. And you can see how the behavior is going to be shaped through the stories that we're told. Because the truth of the matter also is that stories have been used to shape behavior as long as there have been stories.
Well, yes, absolutely. But the good news is that not everybody allows society to control their mind. And I guess that's why we're here talking today. And at one of the questioning science conferences, I fed back on a bit of research I'd done. And I'd invited participants, if they wanted, to complete a personality test. I've always been very interested in personality. And there's a particular personality instrument which you may have come across. It's called the Myers-Briggs type instrument. And it's the most widely used of all personality tests, which brings with it the great advantage that there's an almost data bank of people who've taken the test, and it's broken up by country of origin and by occupation, for example. So you can dip into a country and say, oh, I wonder what lawyers look like, what their personalities are like in that country. Or you can look at industry types, for example, or you can look at industry types across the world. Anyway, so I had 85 completed results from people who had attended questioning science. And you can imagine they're a particular kind of person who wants to spend their holiday. We call these holidays learning holidays. So you can forget about sunbathing on the beach. People have a jolly time listening to fascinating talks and chatting over lunch and dinner and breakfast over a weekend. Some people come for a bit of a holiday where we explore interesting buildings and other things before. But anyway, so I have these 85 returns. And my goodness, what they revealed was, I thought, absolutely fascinating. And nobody done this sort of work before for some reason. And if I just home in on one aspect of this test, just so that you and anybody listening can understand the significance of the results. It's based on psychological types of Carl Jung, and there are 4 pairs of opposite types. One is introversion, extroversion, which I think speaks for itself. I'm not going to go through all 4 types here today because time is short. But if I just talk about one pair of opposites, which is particularly fascinating, and it is the distinction between the sensing type, so-called, and the so-called intuitive type. And these words, these labels, are, I would say, rather misleading. So I just explain very briefly. The sensing type is the type for whom the world that is perceived is the world delivered by the 5 senses. So the world for a sensing type is the world that they see, taste, smell, and so on and so forth. Now, the intuitive type, which is the opposite type, is very, very different from that, because it doesn't mean intuition. The intuitive type perceives the world of possibilities. So not so much what's there, but what could be there. That's the meaning of the intuitive type. I hope that makes sense. Now, in Britain, the proportion of the population, according to this data bank amassed from all the people who've taken the Myers-Briggs type, which is abbreviated to MBTI, the data bank says that for the UK, the majority of the population is sensing, but there is a minority of intuitive types, and it's calculated as being 37%. 37%.
That's a significant number. And I think, my feeling on this is that actually it's higher than that, but we are taught to be sensing rather than intuitive.
Well, it may, who knows, but that's what the data says. 37%. Now, it's higher, well, it's lower in many European countries than that. In Italy, it's about 25% intuitive. France, similar. Ireland, it's a little over 40%. And America is slightly lower than UK. So here we are in a country, arguably, let's say, with around 37% intuitive. In the sample that I've collected from people who'd attended questioning science, 93% were intuitive.
You see, the thing is, when I am talking to clients, many of them have questions, but they've been taught to not actually question. So over the last 4 years, when my clients come to me for therapy, we get talking about all sorts of things. And of course, the last 4 years looms large in a lot of people's minds. And I start to tease out how they feel about things. And I can tell you that most of them are intuitive. They smelled a rat a long time ago, but they don't dare to trust that because the reality looks different from what they feel. And I think it's that disconnection between what the gut's saying and what they perceive reality to be, which is a construct that society is presenting to them, and then not having the courage to step out of that and go, well, maybe I'm right. And because nobody says anything, they think that they are alone.
Mm.
So often the first person to hear the questions, at which point, and this goes, I mean, we're talking about that situation, but why people become or come to me in need of therapy is because they are disconnected from their emotional selves, from the gut, from that sensing bit, which is why I'm saying, actually, I think it's probably a higher proportion of intuitives in the population, but they have been taught to switch it off. And of course, my job as a therapist is to help them to switch it back on. Not just in the last 4 years, but it's been, my life's work in a sense, is to help people switch it back on. Because when they switch it back on, then the next thing is they feel stronger. And then the next thing is they start going, I don't think that's going to work for me. And that's a very interesting process. So what you're doing is extremely exciting because you're bringing people together. You also have research qualifications program, it seems. So it would be good if you could tell us about that, and then how people can find out more about you and find you, because I'm going to put all of that information in the description box as well.
Well, thank you, Anna. And it is exciting if we're actually allowed to exercise our critical faculties. And who knows what we'll find. Research is such an interesting journey, because when you start at the beginning, you can't really predict where it's going to take you. And so what we do is we offer 2 qualifications. One is a diploma, a research diploma, and that involves somebody writing 12,000 words, a modest length, but you can write quite a lot in 12,000 words. And then there's a longer one, a master's research qualification, where you would write 40,000 words. And if the work is of a high standard, then of course we'll publish it, because the purpose of this research is not to do some work that will just earn you some letters and sit on a dusty shelf. No, the purpose is, it's a new form of activism, really, is to discover new findings that we will help you put out into the world as new truths. And my goodness, we need those new truths, don't we? And so that's really what we offer. One-to-one supervision, Rolls-Royce, because if you have one-to-one supervision with somebody who's quite an experienced researcher and writer, then you can learn the skills of thinking and writing. I mean, you talked earlier, Anna, about the medieval schools teaching rhetoric. And I'm very much a believer that clear thinking is accompanied by clear writing. And we've never been taught at school how to write. And so all the time I've been in education, I found that actually people struggle to put sentences together in a logical way. Well, you won't need to suffer on your own, because you'll have one-to-one supervision. And by the end of that process, you will have learned something that you were never taught at school. I mean, for some reason, our schools think that you can learn the art of thinking and writing by osmosis. Well, you can't really. It takes a lot of concentrated effort, but in the end, it's worthwhile, because then you've not only made new discoveries, which are anchored in firm evidence, but you've also learnt the art of, dare I say it, writing clearly, which we've never been taught. I ran a workshop while I was still working in the mainstream university system for academics on academic writing. And my first question, it was a room with about 40 academics there. My first question was, How many of you have been taught how to write? And only one hand went up in the room out of those 40 people. So we've all muddled through. It's really it's astonishing in so many ways, but we can put that right now.
Yeah. So this is wonderful. What is the website? How can people find you?
The website is www.truthuniversity.co.uk.
Marvelous. I will be putting a link to it in the description box.
Thank you. And I'll give an email as well. And it's all one word. It's infotruthuniversity. So it's Truth University with info on the front of it at protonmail.com. And you can write to us on that address to find out about the Questioning Science holiday coming up in, when is it? 17th to the 18th of August. Or if you're interested in doing some research, even if you're a bit nervous, don't be too nervous just to write. We'd be delighted, really delighted to hear from you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm sure that our paths will cross again. Thank you, Gloria.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a great week and goodbye.